So in the past, I think I've mentioned to you that I belong to an organization called the Military Christian Fellowship of Canada. And the mission of our organization is to take the gospel to the serving and retired military community and their families, and just do what we can to preach the good news. We work in conjunction with the chaplains, and it's just a ministry Canada-wide. Part of my responsibilities in this ministry is to respond to the prayer requests that we receive, and we get a couple during the week. And so what I would do is I would get the request, try to contact the individual, and have a conversation about what they would like me to share. And so about 6 months ago, I received an email from somebody who's joining the military. And he said that he's about to go to boot camp and says, would you pray for me? And so as part of the connection, I found out he actually lived in Dartmouth. And so I asked, could I come over and have a cup of coffee with you? And I can tell you some war stories, prepare you for Cornwallis. It's in St. John now. And he says, no, I'm about to go. And really, that's what's happening. So I said, okay, so we talked a little bit. I found out he goes to, he's a believer, and he goes to a church in Dartmouth, and he's 40 years old, joining the military, and he's got a wife and a couple of children. And so he went away, and we prayed, and I shared it, and I heard nothing about it. And then around Easter, I got an email from him, and he's telling me he got injured. And he injured his eye, and they took him off course. And he's standing off, he doesn't know what to do, and I could sense in that text thing, because guys text, he was panicking. So I said, can I talk to you? So I phoned him up and I talked to him, and I asked him, so what's going on? Tell me what's happening. And I said, well, do you think it's possible if you go approach your boss, your sergeant, and say, can I go back to Halifax and spend some time with my family as I recover? And I said, that'll maybe, ease things down with you a little bit there. And so that was it. We stopped talking, and he went and asked, and he'd come back to Halifax. And I found out he was in Halifax, and so Louise drove me over, and I went and had coffee with him, and we sat and talked. But I could sense that there was something really odd happening to him. Like, he had a job beforehand, he looked forward to going to the military, but he had this injury, and he started thinking about his livelihood and his life and his family. And then I could sense some frustration and anger. And I have to admit, he was a bit naive, because I'm not sure what he was expecting the military to do when he got hurt. Like, did he expect his big burly sergeant to come up and say, oh, poor little boy, let's come here, let me hug. And I don't mean to be rude like that, but I don't know what he was expecting. But I said, the military attitude is, you're broken. Let's get you to the hospital. Let's get you fixed. Let's get you recovered and get you back to work. It's a matter of fact, and it's a very reasonable thing. And I say that they did an awful lot to get him going, but he was losing it. I could tell it. And so I knew he was a believer. And so I talked to him about the verse that I'm going to talk about today from Philippians. And it's in chapter 4, and it talks about a peace that God offers him, or God offers us. And I said, we should be talking and praying about this, and we should be seeking God's guidance in this. And not like I was lecturing him, I worked in the conversation, so we had a discussion about it. And then part of my thing was I arranged for him to go see somebody at the medical facility here to talk to him about his future, to let him know what's going on. And I have friends in the hospital, the military hospital. And then I also said, you should talk to somebody about your anxiety that has really started to take over your life. And so he said yes, we said goodbye, and I never heard from him again. And then the next text I got from him, he's going back to St. Jean. He had been to see the hospital. Everything was going kind of good for him. He went back on course and graduated 2 weeks ago. And so it's like, so things are going. But I get a text for him. I'm graduating, and I don't start my next course till September, and it's in Borden. And we talked about the fact you're going to move away from your family, and things are going to happen. But he did not seem to be happy. And again, we talked a little bit, and I said, can we talk? And then he just never replied. Text is all he did. And then I'm waiting, and I said, well, again, while you're waiting, why don't you ask if you can come back to Halifax, take some leave, holiday with your family, and maybe talk to a medical person here, and you can get your treatment here. And so I found out he did. He come back, he went to see his doctors, and they were uncertain of what they could do for him. For his eyes, that he damaged his cornea. There was a talk of a cornea transplant. There was and so that was kind of it. But he never spoke to me. He did like these cryptic text messages, and so Friday night I get one. And I was like, okay, can we go for a coffee? Can we do something? And his text goes, I'm confused. I'm worrying. I'm anxious. There's racing thoughts. They're all negative. I'm very distraught. I've submitted my voluntary release from the military. And then, he's evading me for phone calls. I said, can I come over? I'm not some whatever. I'm just a guy who reached out to him. A brother in church who was doing what other brothers and sisters do. But he never got back to me. And he never did this. And so I was worried about him. And I was worried, but I know he's with his family and he's there. But I asked you a question. For what I've said so far, do you think he's experienced that peace that God or Jesus had offered us? And before you say something else, I'm going to say, no, he isn't. No, he isn't. And I'm not judging him. I'm just saying this is his reality. And what I have experienced in my relationship with God and my interaction with many people, I find that there's not a lot of people who experience some of God's blessings. They will read scripture, they'll come to church, they'll hear these things, they hear about God's promises, they hear about God's blessings, but when you ask, and so, what is something you want to be thankful about or whatever, they're kind of silent. And I'm not saying, they're a bad Christian. It's just that they're silent because they've never really sat and thought, and they've heard pastors say time and time and again, these are things that God wants to give you, but they haven't experienced it. And so what happens, especially in this time of year, and if you were with us this morning, so every Sunday before service at 9 o'clock, we stop what we're doing. Pastor Aaron takes us and leads us in a time of praise and prayer, and to help us, remind us that we've come here on God's invite to worship Him. And so we do this. And this morning, he was joking about Christmas is next week. Like, how did that happen? And all of us know that it sneaks up, and Christmas is such a wonderful time in a month, and yet it is this month that sometimes our heads are spinning. And we don't know what's going on, and we get a little bit busy, and we get a little over anxious, and stuff like that happen. And then after Christmas, there's the follow-up. And so I thought this message, from what I was listening to my friend, and from what I've been hearing from some of us in the church, and from what I've experienced myself, is maybe we should talk about the gift of peace that comes through this whole period that Jesus has brought to us. In the song, it talks about may the peace that is in heaven fill the whole earth there. And so the peace I'm going to talk about, it's not like, all the war ends and every nation loves each nation. It's this personal peace that we have, this inner turmoil that we sometimes face when we encounter a problem. And it's not our intention to go off the deep end, but sometimes we get overwrought. We have an issue happen to us, and it seems to be under control, and we start to think about it, we start to worry about it, and then soon the emotions that God gave us, that He blessed us with, that He allows us to have so we can enjoy life, they take over. And we start to worry and get anxious, and we make these decisions that are probably not the right decision to make while we're in that kind of state of mind. And so I've read it time and time again, and I've heard about this inner peace that God offers. And so I just want to share it. It's very possible for us, and I'll talk a little, I'll expand what I mean by that. So first of all, I don't know if it's up there. Yes, it is. So that is from Philippians, and Paul is talking to the people there, and he's giving us some advice on living life. And in this particular verse, he's saying something. And the one thing I like about the gospel, it sounds so simplistic. Don't be anxious about anything. And I'm sorry, it is at times simplistic. In a sense, like, don't be anxious. Well, how can I not be anxious? And so Paul is saying, well, here's something you can consider doing. So let me read this. Don't be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ. So don't be anxious, but in every situation, good or bad, by prayer, which is by communicating with God and being thankful for that you get to communicate and you have something to talk to God about, bring it to Him. And the result will be that when you trust God, you seek His kingdom, you seek His righteousness, He brings this peace on us that is, sometimes it doesn't make sense that I can feel this way because of what's happening around me. And He'll give us this peace which will stay with us and guard what's happening in our hearts and our minds, our emotions, our decision making. It'll protect us from being irrational at times. So this peace doesn't mean, that we will never experience a problem. It doesn't mean that as soon as you get God's peace, you recognize it, and then, everything's peachy keen, and you're walking around. But it's this gift that Jesus gives us that we can draw on and face the world. Open up a newspaper, read CNN, or the computer, read CNN and read something that a world's leader, and not wanting to punch a computer screen, but saying, well, what can I do about that? Well, I can look at it, I can recognize it, I can pray, and I can do it, but not to lose it because there's something that is emotionally affecting us. So a couple key things in the verse there, I'll just kind of point out. He says, don't be anxious. And so you've heard people talk about anxious, and it's this experience, it's worry. There's this uneasiness, there's this nervousness that you're concerned about something that is happening or is about to happen. So he says, don't be anxious about that. Don't fret on it, don't worry about it. Because the symptoms of anxiety are over worry, you get concerned, you get uneasy, you're distressed, you're jumpy. We have expressions for sometimes when we're getting anxious about a situation. We say, I'm worried sick. Or people say, I got knots in my stomach. Or, my heart's in my mouth because I'm afraid and I don't know what to do. So we have emotions, and we're allowed to feel sad. We're allowed to feel upset at some things. But then there's a time to reel that in and say, there's a situation in front of me and I need to address it. And I'm no good if I'm ranting and raving and screaming or blaming somebody or doing something else like that. Anxiety is a very legitimate and unfortunately growing mental health disorder in our society. And it's because I think it's because we're such fast-paced and there's so much demands to produce, to enjoy, to have fun, that people are realizing they can't do everything expected of them. And they should never expect to do, but it happens. In the Gospel of Matthew, I think chapter 5 and 6, we have the story which we always call the Sermon on the Mount, of which Jesus is sitting up talking to people who believe and don't believe, just the general population. And he's talking to them and he's giving them advice on life, how to live life, how to experience it. And he's actually talking about, and this is what all the prophets before me were talking about, this is what the commandments lead to, this is how the kingdom of heaven works. So he's offering all these things. And in one particular verse in chapter 6, it's verse 27, he says, he's talking about worry. He says, can any of you that by worrying add one single hour to your life? Can worry improve your situation? And the reality, medically, it tells us you start to worry and you stress, you're taking hours off your life. So Jesus, he just doesn't casually say this. He offers guidance, and he says, and I will help you through this. Worrying is like this over-anxiousness and concern about something that, in reality, if we step back, we can say, I still need to be bothered by this situation, but I need to address it. I need to be able to deal with it. But if every day it's like, oh, woe is me, it's not going to happen. Worrying, I have a quote from somebody, and I forgot to write who it was. Worrying accomplishes nothing expresses unbelief in God's sovereignty and goodness, because he wants what's good for us. And it's unbecoming behavior of people who believe in God. If we're worrying and we're meddling and the world looking at us, it's like, if you can't find the peace from God, like, how am I ever going to find it? So it's something that is something we have to be concerned about, because we have situations in our life that we need to address. We can't just ignore them. We can't just say, oh, well, dear God, in the power of Jesus, give me peace. Woof, it's over. I don't have to think about that anymore. That's not how it works. And so he's saying, pull back, stop. And he doesn't say how to do that, but there is guidance in Scripture, and there is guidance in society today how to address our anxiety and our worry. So the next part of that passage talks about peace. And Paul shares that instead of worrying, talk to God. Not just once a week when you fit it in, not when you face a problem, but every day acknowledge God's presence. You get up in the morning, hi God, thank you that I have another day. It's simple, off-the-cuff conversation or in traffic. You know, God, I'm feeling a little anxious right now that what is happening, just give me some inner peace so I don't get out and visit somebody I shouldn't be visiting. And so it says, Paul says, bring everything you have, good or bad, present it to God with an attitude of gratitude. With this idea that I'm thankful that I can speak to God, that I woke up this morning, that I'm on this planet, and I have other things, and that I'm thankful that despite this miserable situation I face, the God of the universe is walking beside me and wanting to comfort me and hold me, to at least stop my heart racing, to calm me down so I can address whatever problem is happening. The peace that Jesus says he's offering, that God says is offered, it gives us a bit of confidence to face the world, to face our problems head on, to address them and to deal with them. And God's peace, it's an experience of contentment. And that's not indifference. It's like, I'm thankful that I have the world around me. I'm thankful for my church. I'm thankful for things I can contribute and they can contribute to my life. It's seeing the world through, we say this through Jesus' eyes. We call it the agape love, this unselfish life. This peace allows us to go out in the world and just want to be, a neighbor to somebody, despite what's going on. And I'm not talking about somebody just abandoning whatever they're doing and then going on hugging people and buying them coffee, which is great. But it allows you to see that there's people out there struggling. There's my friend in Dartmouth who's going off the deep end of worry of his future, and that maybe I can have something or you can have something to do it. The peace that is given to us does not mean that when we experience this peace, we will never face trouble. It doesn't mean that at all. And it doesn't mean that when you bring your petitions and your prayers to God and you're thankful and He gives you your peace, that you will resolve your problem. It doesn't mean that your problem will go away and everything will be fixed. I have a niece. I had a niece from Louise's side of the family. Her name is Tracy. And several years ago, she was diagnosed with brain cancer. And she was a young girl, I think 30, had a couple of children, was married, and started going through the treatment. And everybody around her was all worried for Tracy. And rightfully so. She had a brain tumor, and it was cancerous. Tracy was a new believer and found this peace, had connected with God and realized that I need God as I'm going through this. And so as she went through whatever therapy she had, and she went through surgery, it was pretty obvious she was not surviving. It was obvious this disease was going to kill her. And so Tracy, she got a hold of God's promise. She called on His peace, and she was able to accept what was happening with her without being angry at God. She didn't say, yay, God, thank you for the cancer. But she could accept it knowing that God loves her and cares for her. And then she sat with every family member and consoled them. And helped them move forward, helped them adjust to her death, her dying. She's the one that was having the problem. And so God gave her this peace where she was able to witness to everybody who she encountered. And it was such a wonderful experience to witness, because they go, that's that peace that just doesn't make sense. It's unexplainable and understandable, and it's God saying to her, Tracy, let's not worry about the cancer right now. Let's worry about, or think about the fact I love you. I care for you. I'm here with you. Talk to your family. Trust me. And that was it. And Tracy died. She died in the end, and I share her story a lot of times when I'm telling people, because that, especially to my family, they've seen it, and now they can connect to what it means. And so when I'm telling other people that, you can have this peace that doesn't make sense, not so that she can hide from the fact that she had cancer, not from the fact you can run away from your problem, but the fact is she could then live through that experience and do what was necessary to do, such as go for treatment, such as talk with her children about God, such as talk to her friends about God. And so God granted her that peace. And the last part of the Philippians statement talks about protecting, guarding our hearts and minds in Christ. And basically it says, when you're in a relationship with Jesus and you're seeking after Him and His sovereignty and His kingdom, and He grants you this peace, not for just the times of trouble, but for life in general. And what will happen is when something happens and something uncomfortable or ugly or something that should cause a really bad reaction, you react, and then God will pull you back. And then slow you down and say, all right, Anton, how do you deal with this? How are you going to approach this issue? And I talk about, this is where we see the world through Jesus' eyes. We see some ugly, horrible things happening in the world. And then Jesus says, but I love those people too. And so could you reach out to them? Could you pray for them? And that's what this peace does. That's what guards us against judgmental things and doing things like that. Again, I always say this peace does not make us ignore what is happening, but it causes us to settle down, get in perspective, and to deal with whatever is happening. So I specifically wanted to talk about the peace in times of trouble, when we're facing some situation that is very real to us. With my friend facing his medical and anxiety and everything like that. That's the peace I'm talking about, because God gives us that. God will give us that thing. So we'll sit there, and I know in our church we've had people over the last half year undergo some very awful things that we don't want to be. There's things relating to job, relating to our health, relating to our finances, and for personal circumstances. And so this is what we face. Every one of us, we're not exempt from this. And if we're not facing it now, we will probably be exposed to something that is difficult to deal with. And God is saying to us, you're going to have that, but I want to give you this peace so you can deal with that difficult situation. From my, I say experience, but from what I've looked at and I've seen people who don't have this peace, there are some common things, and I'm not saying this to be judgmental, I'm saying there are some common traits that happen when people don't have this peace. And one of the things that I find out is our nature, like when we face a problem, we're stubborn. We are trained to do it ourselves, fix it ourselves, go it alone, and so we start to dig the hole alone. And then God will say, whoa, step back, Anton, step back. There's other people around you. I'm here, calm down. And so when you're in a relationship with God, He will say that. But we're habitually stubborn to do it alone there. We have another thing too, is that when we're facing a problem, no matter what it is and it's difficult, we get embarrassed by it. And our nature is we don't want to share it and hurt our family or friends. And we don't want to expose our weakness. We even share from God, who, He knows everything, right? He knows what's going on. And so we do this thing. And then another trend and so it keeps us to keep it by ourselves. And when you're in a relationship with God, the Holy Spirit's going like, Anton, Anton, Anton. I know it's embarrassing. We know that. But we need to deal with it. You need to get over that. And let's address this issue that's happening here. And then some of us, we're not in the habit of having a conversation with God. We'll sing some beautiful worship songs, which are just songs of absolute praise, and their prayers. And we'll send an email around, pray for somebody, and we'll do it. But we're not in our own habit of talking to God. You know, sometimes we think we need to use like the words holy and thee and thou, and we have to be very proper when we're talking to God. He just wants some simple conversation. You go through an intersection and almost take out 5 kids who run in front of the car and say, oh! And it's like, God, thank you that never happened. Simple conversation. Or if you happen to hit the kids, God, help me through this. And so it's these little habitual things. We get up in the morning, we start. It's something that you have to get into it. And some of us, we're not into that habit. And so we don't experience the peace because we're too busy, we're kind of stubborn, and we're not used to it. And maybe we don't believe it. Or maybe some of us are a little selfish, and when we experience that peace, we don't tell our friends what's happening. Because that's the word of mouth. I tell Tracy's story because it was incredible, and I've seen more like that. And every time I see it, I share it because we need to know. That's just not something that Paul had to finish writing a chapter and did a fill-in. There's something he's experienced. He knows it's Jesus' promise of the peace. So I would dare say I want to share a practice that I do to address some issues. And I've had some kind of strange issues happen in my life, and not every week is an emotional roller coaster. But I've noticed that sometimes you're facing stuff and you need to talk with God about it. And so I got the habit of doing it. At a minimum, once a week, I set some time aside for myself, and I'll talk to God about things that happened during the week. Because when I'm talking, it reminds me of what happened. I look for where God blessed me. I look for where I was a bit of a jerk in that situation. And then I ask God, can you give me a hand through this? So that's the habit. But when it comes to something very difficult that happens, so I have 4 little steps that I follow. The first step is to stop and acknowledge something. And so what's happening, it's a problem. You know it. You're looking at your bank account, and there's a bill to be paid, and you see 0, 0, 0, 0. You know you got to pay your bill. You know it, and so it's very obvious, and it might be a big deal, or it might not. And then your heart starts to race because you know you didn't pay that bill last month, or that you've been tiptoeing around playing the credit card game and stuff like this. So you're there, and so what I would do is stop, say, God, you know what's going on here? I think I need to figure out what's going on. I can't pay this bill. I need to address it. I need to be able to be rational about this. And so I need to be able to calm down. So that's the first thing I do, and that's the first step. When something strange is happening, and then it might be, well, don't worry, that's nothing. Or you know it. You know in your life when this issue is happening. And then my second step is to be a little more intentional about it. And so I'm going to talk to God a little bit more in depth. So after I do this, the first thing I'm asking is, God, help me slow down and not go gaga over this. Don't let Louise find out until I can figure out what's going on here. So you try to control your emotions, and you ask God for that peace. And He, if you want, He will grant it. But He says it doesn't end here. He says, now I sit down and I become more intentional. And I am a list maker. And so I would look at my problem and I'll start writing a couple things about it. Say it was a financial thing. I'll look at it and I'll start to write, okay, so you messed up your budget. Oh, you don't have a budget. So I make a note, I really don't have this tight budget. I noticed that I can't tell you where my money goes. I have this credit card that they keep on accepting, so I keep on spending. And then I use credit cards. And so as you're going through this, I start to make lists that become obvious to me of this is part of my issue that God, I want to bring to you. God, I don't budget very well. God, I don't know where my money is going. God, I don't have a budget. And so I'll take that, and I'll sit there on my list, and I'll talk to God about the points. And I'll just do that. And then, step 3 is I listen. And then God has never reached down with a hand and slapped me yet. But He talks to us whether you realize it or not. And so when you're faced with something tough, you need to give God some time, in a sense, to talk to you, because He wants to hear if you're listening. And what He does when you're listening, He'll I find that it's not maybe his voice, but all these points I just made get repeated back to me. And it's like, hello, Captain Obvious. You don't have a budget, so how do you know where your money's going? So I find God will do this. But through it, he'll remind me, we need to address this, and we need to do it. And every time I'm at this stage, God will always tell me, and remember, you are not on this planet to do life alone. You're meant to be in a relationship, in a harmonious relationship with other people, but you're meant to be with others. And I have blessed people with gifts and talents who can address your problem. I have given people some financial skills. I've given people some listening skills. I can do this. So what it's suggesting is you're probably going to have to talk to somebody else too. I'll be here, but to fix this miserable thing in front of you, you're going to have to do something. Which might mean going to somebody else and saying, can you help me? I've said this several times while I'm here, is we all need a friend that we can talk to. And a friend that will laugh with you and have a lot of fun and then say, oh, what are you doing there? You told me about this. Anton, think about this. You know when you bought that Xbox One the other day there, did you need that? Should you have done it? You need a friend who will be honest to you and stand by you and guide you through that. And it's not an easy thing to find that friend. And we have friends that will go down the tube with you and party on the way down. And afterwards, like, wow, wasn't that amazing? And then they get up and walk away and you're left in ruins. And that can be fun for a half hour, but you want somebody to be honest. And I say this all the time. And you know what? You have a partner, you have a spouse. That's not that friend, I'm sorry. You must reveal things, your struggles with your spouse, but you cannot burden them necessarily with your maybe error, or it could be something beyond your control. I have a medical situation. I can't tell my wife yet. I need to talk with somebody to help me say this. And so God reveals the fact that there are people out there, friends, untrained people, professionals, that can help us through many, many issues in life. And then the last step that I have, so I'm thinking, acknowledge what's going on, be intentional, and be specific what you want to talk to God about. Just don't go, oh God, give me peace, and that's it. Let me know when you fixed it. I'm just going to go and buy another game for that Xbox One I shouldn't have bought in the first place. But it's not that. And he wants to engage us, because that's the fourth step. Act. So you listen, you hear. There'll be a revelation to you of some things you can do or cannot do. Not all problems are solved like this. Sometimes, like Tracy, she went through these steps, she taught her family, and she died in the end. And that's just God's will on how that happened. But through the process, she found a peace and a comfort, and she was able to address what was going on. Paul tells us that when you're struggling, the first thing you face, especially something kind of odd or weird, or you know it's going to be challenging, stop and talk to God. Present stuff. Be in a habit of talking to Him all the time about the things that are going on in your life. And be thankful. He'll give you the peace. But it's a two-way engagement. You have to be listening. And in many cases, you have to be doing things. And like I say, we have things happen in our life that are beyond our control. And no matter what's going to happen, we see the end result is, I'm going to lose my job. That's what's going to happen. But the thing is, I'm going to lose my job and I get all upset. I might go visit my boss in the office after hours and explain to him using knuckle sandwiches as a means to say why I should not be losing my job. That's not the thing that Jesus will do for us. He'll calm us down and be able to face the reality. You're about to lose your job. You need to know, like have a plan in place for the future or whatever. It always doesn't turn out. I say that the peace that we get, especially this month, and you're trying to get into Bears Lake here, Saturday, Friday, the peace that God gives us is that peace that you have when you're sitting at the lights and it's not moving and the guy behind you is beep, beep, beep. The peace God gives you prevents you from putting your car in park, opening your door, going back, and offering to beep the horn for him with his head. God will say, no, I'll at least let you go and think about this and cool down And then I say, and don't come here next Saturday, or something like this. So I say and I joke about it, but I know that there's things that happen to us, and we get down the path, and we're feeling this, and we're out of control, and the thing about God says, that's too late. Too late, you should ask me first. He doesn't say that. He says, when you realize it, stop, talk to me, and at least I will stop your racing heart. And that is a true promise, and that is a real promise, and I've experienced it, and I've known it, and yet I'll do some dumb things afterwards or whatever, but at least I didn't have a heart attack before I made the next step there. And as odd as it sounds, we know that all this stress and that does take away from our life, and we go from there. So the praise team, I think, slowly walk up here. So one thing I have found, it's very difficult to talk to somebody about God's peace when you have a health issue, or you're having struggles at the workplace, you're about to lose your job, you have marital problems, your financial problems. It's hard to talk to somebody about that because their mind is fixated on something else. So as brothers and sisters, we don't give up on it. We don't lecture. We sit there, we lend an ear, we pray for them, but we introduce the thought is like, how about if we just stop and think about this right now? Let's talk to God about this. So that's the best thing we can do, and that's what happens, so we don't give up on it. Isaiah 26:3 says something which is really, really great. It starts off, you, and then you, it means God, so he's talking to God. It says, you will keep in perfect peace all those who trust in you and whose thoughts are fixated on you. Those that are seeking after God, those that are seeking after His kingdom and His righteousness, God will give that peace. How we use it or abuse it is up to us, but it's the offering. When we're looking after God, He'll be there. And again, that does not mean our troubles will go away. Before Jesus was taken to be crucified, he's with his disciples, and he says this message. He says, peace I leave you, my peace I give you. I don't give you as the world gives. Don't let your hearts be troubled, and don't be afraid. These were people who had spent 3 years with him, sought after him, sought his kingdom, listened, grew, loved God, and he's giving them this warning, and he says he's giving them this gift, because he knew that in a few hours, everything, hell would try to break loose. Everything would go wrong, and the disciples would panic, and they would run away, and they'd be afraid. And he knew this, and he said, but I'm giving you this gift. I'm going to help you through this. And what did they do? Well, that's human nature. That's our default. We panic right off the bat. Any face thing that happens, my thing is always, what will Louise say? It happens, and then I start building it up, and it's like, but it happens. And then what we know what happens with the disciples is that they calm down. And they were still worried about being taken prisoner. And they got together and they at least fellowshiped with each other. And they sat and went through their struggle together. And they listened to him. And Jesus visited them. And he says, peace be with you. And there's a reminder of what he offered. But he said, Jesus, you see him crucified in the tomb, and all of a sudden he's there like, And he said, no, peace, relax. I'm here. I have this promise. And because the disciples were able to find this peace that God offered, they were able to accept the next task Jesus gave them. They were able to act on their problem, and that was to go out and spread the gospel to the world. And that's true because we're sitting here, we're hearing the gospel, and we're doing this. My friend joined the military to be a medic. He used to work in a hospital, and he was a caregiver. And he wanted to be a paramedic, but he couldn't afford it. And so he joined the military thinking it's going to help him, and he could serve his community and do this. And despite his injury, he can still serve in the military. He can still do something there, but he has let his worry overtake him. He's making some irrational decisions right now, decisions that are no good for his future. If he leaves the military, that's all right, but make it by choice, not by emotion and all these other things that tear us apart. And that's what happens to us. We will face problems. We do have problems, but don't let our emotions overrun it. I go to the hospital, I found out I have cancer. I cry like a baby. I will cry and I will feel sad for a couple of days, but then I got to suck it up in a sense to say, okay, what can I do? Is there anything I can do? God, I don't understand. Will you be with me during this time? And so that's in all our troubles, and that's everything that goes on. I pray for my friend that if he doesn't connect with me, that's all right. But I hope he connects with his pastor. I hope he connects with a friend who will sit down and say, let's take it easy right now. Let's think about what's going on. I pray for the church. Pastor Aaron shares some stuff that what's happening. I think of our church family. I know there's many people here who pray for our church family, that we can address these life issues that we're facing, that we can find God's peace, and that we can move forward. We have something we want to happen, but at a minimum, I pray you find this peace so that you can face the life that is before us. The trouble that Jesus said we would have, but He has overrun, He has conquered, and we can survive, so that we can go out with this agape, unselfish love, and love our neighbor, and be a half-decent human being to those around us, even if we are going through trouble. So, my last statement here, as I just say, may God's peace fill our lives through this season and the next, and as we face the world.